Hey everyone, Mike Doloff, Chief Revenue Officer, Inflow Communications. Glad to be with you today. I've got with me over here, Chris Riccio, our Director of Contact Center and Advanced Applications. We were working the last few weeks on putting together a state of contact center as a service, CCaaS, in 2020. Put together an infographic around this. A huge part of our job is educating and talking with people what's going on in the space, in the technology space around contact center, customer interaction, customer engagement. Put together an infographic here that we want to share and walk through with you briefly, and then talk about some of the trends that we're starting to see that you can't maybe see out of this infographic itself. Just elaborate on some interesting trends. So first, just to walk you through this infographic a little bit, we've really broken out the players in the contact center as a service landscape into 4 buckets. We call them the incumbents, the innovators, the build your own, and then the CRM and ticketing players. And I'm not going to walk through in detail. We'll drop a link so you can go through and check it out yourself and kind of see how we broke these up and see some of the commonalities and differences and some of the specific players in those groups. But to just give you a quick sense of it, a lot of times we think of the CCaaS landscape, Gartner Magic Quadrant, a lot of these other great tools that help us think about this in a macro context. That's what this is doing. But I think one of the things that's really fascinating about the CCaaS landscape is there's a lot of nuance underneath this layer, and there's a lot of nuance within the specific players, and there's a lot of confusion around this too. There's converging technologies. Hey, there's CRMs on your CCaaS slide. What are you talking about, right? There's a lot of that overlapping and bleeding together. A lot's changed. Some of it in the very short term, right? Think about work from home and contact centers. With COVID, massive shift towards that in the last 3 months, which is driving adoption and need for different tools. So much going on, but we've picked a couple topics out that we think we want to elaborate on here and discuss. And I've got Chris to kind of highlight what he's seeing, talking with customers, talking with orgs across the world and their contact centers, what they're doing. So Chris, first one that I want to talk about, should customers be striving? There's always been this discussion of best of breed versus all-in-one. Most customers, as they're going into looking at their contact center customer experience technology stacks, should they be focusing on trying to get an all-in-one, or should they be thinking about landing more best of breed adjacent technologies? What are you seeing? What's some advice you could give to customers in that boat?
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion point. What I'll say first is there's no silver bullet. I think contact center past, we used to look at, I want this solution and it's going to satisfy my needs. Here's my checkbox. Well, what has changed is that checkbox has dramatically changed in the last 3 years. Contact center has taken a new sort of vision going forward. And so the question about whether to go all-in-one or do a best in breed, I don't think you're going to go either or. I think it's a combination of both. And so I think what you need to think about is strategically think about your operation. Think about your support mechanism, because the contact center is heavily dependent on a support branch, whether it's IT, whether it's developers, whether it's analysts. But then think about the contact center worker. Depending on the type of industry you're in, ultimately the contact center worker's job is customer engagement and the customer experience and customer service. You can't expect customer service people to be highly technical people. It's very rare that you find someone that can hit both sides of that discussion point. So when it comes to all-in-one discussion or adjacent technologies, you're going to use the different technologies that match what you're trying to accomplish underneath. And when I say underneath, I mean deeper in the operation. So I think nowadays it's a fallacy to think that you're going to go one direction or the other. I think without fail, you're going to look for a base infrastructure that services the customer service or the people that are dealing with your clients face to face, and I'm using the term loosely. Then you're going to have potentially another subset of technologies depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So is it a BI sort of initiative? Right? Do you have a heavy analytics? Do you have something specific in development that you're trying to accomplish? And how does that impact? And what are the branches and tentacles from the main core operation? So to go one or the other, I don't think there's, like I said, a silver bullet. I think you're going to have to strategically look at your operation. What do those folks need? And then outside of the context of that, and remember, we haven't even talked about customer engagement. We're talking contact center solution. Today, that's just a subset of the big trajectory of what was happened in the contact center space. It's now all about customer engagement. that by design means you're going to bring other adjacent technologies. So I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is think about your operation, break it into two camps, think about your operational folks and what tools do they need to be able to focus. That's the key. Focus back on the customer. If you bring technology to the table that has them fumbling to have that discussion with your customer, that's a problem. And then think about the broader context of customer engagement and what do you need to accomplish? And that'll point you to the adjacent technologies. Again, I don't think it's going to be one or the other. It's a combination of both.
Yep. Love it. Selectively adjacent is a phrase we've talked about, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be picking and choosing pieces here adjacent that are appropriate for the different departments. You're right. I think part of it is the contact center scope, focus, and sort of place within the organization has expanded. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
the foolish to sort of try to look at this in too narrow of a lens.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So next question. Seen a lot of new technology players come onto the scene the last 2, 3, 4 years that have some really tremendous technologies, a lot of things that never seen before around customer
Mm-hmm.
interaction. And a lot of these players are coming up as sort of digitally native, meaning they're not as voice centric, or maybe voices after that they've started off of SMS, email, other channels, digital channels versus voice. What are you seeing? What does this mean for customers looking at this landscape?
So I love technology and I love where we're going and what we can do with it. More than anything, I love options. However, what I'm seeing consistently with the guys that provide, and I'm not going to name names, but the solution providers, they're coming up with some great technologies and they're approaching contact center from the top down, from the future point of view downwards. And while they do some great little things, every time I get into a discussion with them, alongside with customers, it's just not me. It's me engaging with clients and they have a particular thing. We'll just call it the shiny object that looks great. That's awesome. But oftentimes when you ask the critical questions, and the critical questions are, what about my core need? I still have to do this, this, and this, which comes from my legacy environment. I love that your product does this, but what about this core functional piece? And I will say a high percentage of those folks have to sort of hem and haw and say, well, we can do this, but this, or we can do this, but this. When you're thinking about technology, I think about how technology advances and just in general, I never want to remove something. I want to continually build and enhance. So if I have to go to a futuristic product which has really great options, if I have to give away half of what I'm used to and what sustains me, I'm not sure it's the best trade-off. Again, there's great technologies out there, but in every discussion I've had, there's always a point where they're not able to answer the core question. And they're the type of provider, and I don't mean this as a negative slant, everyone's in the business to sell, and they want new customers to help advance their technologies, but I shouldn't have to give away something that is meaningful to me. I'm trying to enhance my experience, not alter it or change it. Now, in some cases, that may be one and the same. My caution is, as you're looking at new advanced technologies, make sure that they can still support the fundamental pieces, which, by the way, will never go away. They may alter and change, but fundamentally, those pieces are critical because you didn't land where you are in your business, whatever it is, without that foundation. So
Love
that's
it.
my comment there. Yeah.
I think it's great. I'll add one piece to that. I think this to me is speaking directly to folks who might be on a premise-based technology today specifically, assuming that as you move to a CCaaS player, and like Chris said, not naming names, just speaking generally here, the that all of what I have today is going to, of course, be there, and now I'm just going to get these other shiny things on top of it. Double check that, confirm that, be wary of
Mm-hmm.
that, because that's not always the case. It's not always the case. We've seen that bite people or be a surprise for folks that I just assumed that this has been in place in contact center technology for X number of years. Of course, it's going to be there. Maybe, maybe not. Let's double check
Yeah.
that.
And I want to add one more comment there. I think it's natural to look at the future and to look at new and greater technologies. That I think you would be naive to not do that. But I think what's really critical is strip away any names or products and just get down to the core fundamental pieces. I think from an IT's perspective, from an operations perspective, it'd be very smart of you to come up with 4 or 5 pillars, foundational pieces, with one objective in mind. Don't back me into a solution that backs me into the wall. I mean, today, and the open source movement has been around for years, but it's all about, I need to have a product that's open so I can go anywhere I need to in the future. Don't bootstrap me into you. Well, your option is X and X. To me, if you tell me, well, we have this and this, well, you're asking me for an option, but the option I want isn't on the table. So distilling your options as my option, you're basically saying, oh, here's the two I've chosen for you. Which one do you like best? That's not a valuable proposition to me as a customer. I need to be able to walk in and say, I want this, this, and this. And what I'm really talking about is open source. I can point and click and get myself connected to other applications, because you're going to do that by design. Anyone that buys a product that doesn't think it's going to connect to another product is wholly naive. And if a product is locked down per se, then it's probably not advantageous for the long game. Those are the two pillar things: open API, and I basically can point and click to another web service, because you're going to have to do that. Add to that the other key pieces, come up with your core pillars, and from there it'll direct you to which products satisfy those buttons. And it's all around, I don't want to be backed into a corner, so in 3 years I have to make another investment because my product still can't do what I need to do in the future.
Yep, love it. Openness and open APIs is a key
Mhm.
piece of the infographic as far as how we thought of the different players in the space. So that's a fantastic point on that. So last question for you, Chris. We're starting to see a trend of more non-traditional consumers, organizations, departments within organizations of contact center technology. And these are folks that are often highly dependent on CRM. Tell us about that trend of the non, this sort of traditional and non-traditional. What does that mean for folks that are looking at their contact center technology?
Yeah, so I want to say this. We knew this stage was coming. We knew this day was coming, because data is not new. It's been around for a while, and a lot of people have either had their about their customers in a CRM or in some other repository. And now with the advances in technology, we can do very dynamic things with interactions. Customer calls in, we look in the database. It doesn't have to be CRM. In my mind, database is CRM anyways, because they all sit in a database. In any case, I see an interaction come in. I can see it's my VIP client, do something dynamic with it. So that segment has been there. And so we've seen the writing on the wall. Now what we're starting to see is that you have CRMs getting into the contact center game, and they're doing a good side play to get in there. It just makes sense. But you do have the differentiation between the traditional contact center and the non-traditional contact center. And where you see this play out is typically in an inside sales environment, where you're not really taking a repetitive call after interaction, but you're having someone who owns a portfolio. Their job is to create client relationships by having consistent and persistent touch points. That's all the customer engagement piece. But those folks could benefit from contact center ACD, but should they be locked into it? Probably not. They need to have a little more freedom. You see that in marketing. Anyone who owns accounts, marketing, anyone whose job is the primary sole relationship for a client, which could be a client under an umbrella. For example, BPOs, you're going to have a central point of contact for that relationship, and then all their employees or whoever benefits from that primary relationship are the ones calling in the contact center. So you sort of have this split. But those guys who own those accounts are never going to work in a traditional contact center process. So whether I should use a traditional contact center versus non-traditional, I think you have to look at the big picture. Are they marketing? What do they do in their marketing? I have come across higher education schools where they have counselors who are sort of like an account manager, but they're doing a lot more things to help the student through the process of getting loans, getting to their semester, make sure they're touching base and doing counseling. Um, yeah, so it's becoming interesting. But because of that, the CRMs are gaining traction, because you have the non-traditional folks that are going to say, okay, I like my CRM. I'm going to use their workflow. What it comes down to is that usually the CRMs are doing a workflow process, not an ACD contact center process. So you're starting to see work come in that goes into a general pool. And as a user, I can just go grab, pick, and choose. Does that work for all environments? Absolutely not. Because the reality is, if you're always grabbing, picking, and choosing, guaranteed you're going to have a customer who sits at the bottom of the barrel constantly. You have to have a way to constantly get those moving, getting projections, or getting those moved up into the funnel so that you have visibility, because you cannot lose that relationship, because that's what customer engagement is about. But if you're trying to mine your portfolio for continued revenue, and let's call it what it is, everyone is, you're going to need a different sort of process there. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not ACD versus non-traditional. You have to look at the big picture. What I'd also say is the metrics those folks are usually held accountable to are slightly different. Where in contact center, you're seeing hold time, wait time, talk time, blah, 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 right? In CRM, you're traditionally seeing, okay, what's my workflow process? What's my closure rate on tickets or processes? What's my conversion rate in terms of sales? Marketing wants to see conversion rate from a qualified lead. And then they have the whole trajectory of drip campaigns, nurture campaigns. I mean, it's a whole different philosophical approach. So I'm always wary of someone who says, oh, I have this contact center solution for this, but my group is slightly different. We do things differently, yet the provider keeps saying contact center, contact center. You have to be careful there, in my opinion. So I think that's why we're seeing more CRM get into the game, that causes you to take a step back and say, wait, am I traditional contact center or non-traditional? And then inside of that, then you still have to think about, well, where does the ACD intersect? Because it will at some point, especially when I'm thinking outbound campaigns for marketing, for drip campaigns. Is it an email campaign? The typical drill there. So yeah, hopefully I answered your question. I mean, this is a topic that really can go in so many different directions depending on the use case. And that could be the use case inside the organization as a whole. And so I think there'd probably be a blend of things there.
No, I love it. I think I think the summary of that is there's this conversion of different technologies and this growth of technology within the contact center technology stack can create a ton of confusion for organizations, and people are thinking of customer engagement completely differently. People are thinking of the contact center as very different, and there's a lot of areas to stumble and trip. So I love surfacing some of these topics and trends up. As always, Chris, pleasure speaking with you. We'll put a link for checking out the blog post and checking out the infographic. Always love to talk with people about this. So ever have questions, hit us up. Would love to talk through contact center technology, contact center operations. That's what we do. That's what we love. That's why we're nerds. So thanks so much, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone.